I refused to spend the first night with my husband. It sounds shocking, doesn't it? But the truth is, I didn't marry him for love. I barely even knew him. And when he reached for me with that unreadable expression, half expectation, half entitlement, I panicked. I pulled away. I told him I needed time. And instead of anger, instead of protest, he simply looked at me with those storm-dark eyes and said, "As you wish." But what unsettled me most wasn't his reaction. It was what I found the next morning, when I woke in a stranger's home wearing a stranger's ring and realized that the man I had pushed away was one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, a millionaire, my husband. I should have been furious or terrified, but instead I laughed, a wild, breathless laugh that didn't belong in my mouth. Because the truth was, I'd spent half my life scraping by, counting pennies, praying for one day of peace. And now, I was married to the kind of man who could buy silence with the flick of his hand. We'd been married for less than 24 hours, and already my world tilted. Here's what you need to know about me. I wasn't looking for this. I wasn't looking for him. The arrangement had been a matter of convenience. His family wanted a respectable wife. I needed stability for reasons I didn't dare admit out loud. He wasn't supposed to matter. Not his eyes, not his voice, not the quiet weight of his presence that seemed to fill every space we shared. And yet that first night I couldn't bring myself to surrender. Something in me rebelled. Something whispered that if I gave in too quickly, I'd lose myself completely. The morning after, I padded into the kitchen of his penthouse, my bare feet sinking into marble so polished it reflected my shadow. The place smelled of fresh espresso, warm and bitter, and there he was, already dressed, already controlled. A black suit, crisp shirt, no tie. A man carved out of restraint. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You slept well?" The question was casual, too casual. Yes, I lied. My body still hummed with restlessness, my mind replaying every second of the night I hadn't touched him. Finally, he lifted his gaze, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw something raw flicker in those eyes. Amusement, maybe even challenge. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. The words crawled under my skin, unsettling me more than if he'd shouted. I wanted to demand what he meant, but my voice caught. Instead, I stared at the way his hands moved, calm, deliberate, as he stirred sugar into his coffee. Hands that could command entire boardrooms, hands that had hovered near me in the dark, but never forced. And that's when it struck me. The strangest part of all this wasn't that he was rich or powerful or mine on paper. The strangest part was how he waited, patient, as though he knew the game had only just begun. I wish I could say I stayed calm, that I kept my walls intact. But the truth? My heart betrayed me. It stuttered, racing every time his eyes lingered, every time silence stretched too long, too heavy. Later that day, he offered to drive me to lunch. No chauffeur, no assistant, just him behind the wheel of a sleek black car that purred like a predator. The city blurred past the windows, but I could hardly focus. Every inch of me was aware of his nearness, the brush of his sleeve against mine, the warmth radiating from his body. At one stoplight, he turned his head, studying me as if I were another deal he was calculating. "Do you regret it?" he asked. My throat went dry. "Regret what?" "Marrying me." The air between us tightened. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. Instead, all I managed was, "I don't know yet." For the first time, his lips curved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "Good," he murmured, shifting gears as the light turned green. "Neither do I." And in that moment I realized this marriage wasn't just a contract. It wasn't just survival. It was a storm I'd stepped into willingly, or maybe unwillingly. But fate didn't care. Because every look, every silence, every restrained movement of his body told me one dangerous truth. I should have known the car ride was only the beginning. From the moment I stepped into his world, I realized there was no such thing as distance between us. Not in the way he carried himself, not in the way his silence seemed to reach across the air and pull me closer. Every second became a test of how long I could pretend not to notice him, or worse, how long I could pretend he didn't notice me. The day after our awkward breakfast, his secretary arrived at the penthouse with a list of upcoming events. Charity galas, board dinners, luncheons with women who wore diamonds the size of ice cubes. Events where a wife was more accessory than partner. He handed me the stack without explanation. "You'll need to choose a dress," he said, as if this were the most natural conversation in the world. I raised a brow. "Do I get a choice?" The corner of his mouth twitched, but his tone stayed cool. "You're my wife. You get more choices than most." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning, but when I spread the invitations across the marble counter, his eyes didn't leave me. They tracked the curve of my wrist, the tilt of my head, as though I were the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever studied. That night, he suggested we dine at home instead of going out. The penthouse transformed into something intimate. Lights dimmed, a table set with silver cutlery, wine breathing in crystal glasses. He didn't sit across from me. He chose the seat beside me close enough that his shoulder brushed mine each time he shifted. "Is this how it always is for you?" I asked, my fork paused halfway to my lips. "Perfect meals, perfect wine, perfect silence?" He leaned back slightly, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Silence isn't the enemy. People just don't know how to live inside it." The words wrapped around me thick as velvet. I swallowed hard, tasting more of him than the food. I should have looked away. I should have broken whatever was forming between us. But instead, I let the silence stretch. Let myself feel how heavy it became when our breathing synced, when the brush of his sleeve felt more dangerous than any kiss. By the end of dinner, I was trembling with the effort of control. When he walked me to my room, separate from his, though I knew that was a choice he had made for my comfort, I half expected him to stop at the door. But he didn't. He followed me inside, leaning against the frame like he owned not just the room but the air itself. "I can move slower," he said, his voice low, steady. "But don't mistake patience for indifference." My pulse stumbled. The room seemed smaller, my walls thinner. What if I never changed my mind? His eyes flickered, sharp and piercing, then softened into something that stole the strength from my knees. "Then I'll carry that answer with me. But don't lie to yourself to punish me." The words sliced through my defenses, not because they were harsh, but because they weren't. For the first time, I saw the truth of him, the man beneath the title, beneath the millions. Not a cold CEO, but someone who understood restraint, who knew power wasn't just about taking, but about waiting until it was given, and I hated that it made me want him even more. The next morning, he asked me to accompany him to his office. It was his domain, a tower of glass and steel that hummed with money and ambition. The moment I stepped inside, whispers followed me. Every glance said the same thing. "Who is she?" He ignored them all. He kept me close, his hand barely touching, the small of my back as he guided me through the halls. That single gesture, possessive yet protective, set fire to every nerve in my body. When the elevator doors closed, we were alone again. The hum of machinery filled the silence. He stood so close I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint cologne that clung to his skin. Dark, clean, intoxicating. "You don't have to be afraid of this," he murmured, eyes on the numbers above the door. "I'm not afraid," I whispered back. His head turned, slowly, deliberately. The steel in his eyes met the defiance in mine, and for one suspended moment, Neither of us looked away. Then the doors slid open. The spell broke, but I knew, just as he did, that we were running out of excuses, because every silence was louder, every look lingered too long, every accidental touch felt like the beginning of something neither of us could stop, and when he said goodnight that evening, his voice carried a promise I couldn't ignore. Soon. I used to think I was good at hiding things, my fears, my doubts, the ache that lived beneath my ribs, but with him, it was as if every mask I'd ever worn slid to the floor the moment his eyes touched mine. And that night, it was raining. The, kind of rain that blurred the city lights into trembling rivers of gold against the glass. I realized I couldn't keep pretending. He had just returned from a late meeting. I was curled on the sofa in one of the living rooms I hadn't yet memorized, barefoot, wearing nothing more than an oversized sweater that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. The storm outside wrapped the penthouse in shadows, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning. When he walked in, he didn't speak at first. He just stood there, jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened, watching me like he was trying to decide if I was real. "You should rest," I said, though. My voice came out softer than I intended. His lips curved, not in amusement this time, but in something almost tender. "And miss this?" I swallowed. "Miss what?" "This," he said simply, his gaze sweeping over me. "Coming home to find my wife waiting." The word wife hit differently in that moment. Not like a title, but like a truth I wasn't ready, for he moved closer, unhurried, each step echoing across the marble floor until he was beside me. His presence filled the space, warm and overwhelming, yet somehow grounding. When he sat, the sofa dipped beneath his weight, pulling me subtly toward him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The storm outside raged, and inside, silence grew, thick enough to breathe. Finally, I whispered, "You don't make this easy." His eyes found mine. "Do you want me to?" The question cracked something open in me. My chest tightened, my fingers curling into the hem of my sweater. I told myself I couldn't fall into this. Not with you, not like this. And yet, his voice was low, careful, like he was coaxing a secret from me. And yet, I admitted, the words trembling out of me, "You're the only thing I can't seem to push away." The confession hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. I expected him to seize it, to twist it into something I'd regret. But he didn't. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and brushed his fingertips against mine where they rested on the cushion. The touch was so light I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But the spark it lit beneath my skin was real, undeniable. You know how hard it is," he murmured, "to stand in my own home, to lie awake at night with you just a wall away and not cross that line." My heart stuttered. "Then why don't you?" His hand shifted, covering mine fully now, warm and steady. "Because when I do, I want it to be your choice. Not convenience. Not obligation. You." It was everything I shouldn't have wanted to hear. Everything that unraveled the last threads of resistance I'd been clinging to. I turned my hand, slowly, so my palm pressed into his. His thumb stroked once over my skin, tentative, reverent. The storm outside cracked louder, as if urging me forward, and before I could lose my courage, I whispered the truth I had been too afraid to say. "I don't want to be patient anymore." His breath caught, sharp and unguarded. In the flicker of lightning, I saw his composure falter, saw desire shadow his eyes. But instead of pulling me into his arms, he leaned closer, so close I could feel his breath warm against my cheek. He paused there, trembling with restraint, waiting. And then, I closed the distance. Our lips brushed. Not a kiss, not yet, but a fragile meeting that stole every ounce of air from my lungs. A taste of what had been burning between us from the very beginning. The kiss deepened, slow, searching, both of us clinging to the edge of restraint even as it threatened to shatter. His hand slid to cradle my jaw, gentle but claiming, while my fingers fisted in his shirt as if to anchor myself. It wasn't fire at first, it was warmth, home. A sense of being seen so completely that my chest ached with it, and then when his lips finally pressed harder, when my resolve broke, I felt the fire, wild and consuming, and I knew there was no going back. But just as the world narrowed to him, just as the storm inside me finally surrendered to his touch, a knock at the door, we froze, breathless. "Sir?" His assistant's voice called from the other side. "It's urgent." The spell shattered. He pulled back first, his forehead resting against mine for one fleeting second before he stood, jaw tight, composure snapping back into place. I sat trembling on the sofa, lips tingling, heart hammering, and I knew with bone after that night nothing was the same. We pretended, of course. Pretended that kiss was just a slip, a mistake born of storms and silence. He buried himself in work. I busied myself with invitations and polite appearances. But every time our eyes met across a room, the memory returned. The taste of him, the feel of his hand on my skin, the way my body had leaned into his as if it had always belonged there. The air between us became unbearable. It happened on a Thursday, after a charity event that left me drained from smiling at strangers who whispered about me when they thought I couldn't hear. By the time we returned to the penthouse, I was exhausted, brittle, ready to collapse into solitude. But he followed me. I reached my room and pushed the door open. But before I could step inside, his voice stopped me. "You're unhappy." I froze. "I'm tired." He moved closer, his tone steady but edged with something raw. "No, you're suffocating, I can see it." I turned, fire sparking in my chest. "What do you want me to say? That I don't belong in your world? That every time those women look at me I feel like an imposter wrapped in silk?" His jaw clenched but his eyes softened. "Then why don't you tell me what you do need?" The words broke something inside me. Weeks of restraint, of silence, of pretending. I couldn't hold them anymore. I need... My voice cracked. I need one thing that feels real. Just one. The moment stretched, heavy, charged. And then he crossed the space between us in 2 strides, his hand cupping my face with a reverence that stole my breath. "This is real," he said, his voice low, almost a plea. "Whatever else we pretend, this is the one thing I can't fake." Before I could speak, his mouth claimed mine. There was no hesitation this time, no careful restraint. The kiss was fierce, demanding, the kind of kiss that erased every doubt I had carried since the day we married. I melted into him, my fingers tangling in his hair, his arm locking around my waist as if he would never let go. The world outside disappeared. There was no boardroom, no whispers, no contracts. Just him. Just us. He pressed me back against the door, the solid wood cool against my spine while his warmth consumed me. Each brush of his lips was both promise and confession, each touch a surrender neither of us could take back. When we finally broke apart, our breaths tangled, ragged and uneven. His forehead rested against mine, his hands trembling where they held me. "I've wanted this since the first night," he admitted, voice hoarse. "Even when you refused me, especially then. Do you know how hard it's been to wait?" I swallowed, hard, my heart racing. "Then why did you?" His eyes burned into mine. "Because I wanted you to choose me. Not the ring, not the name, not the life. Me." The confession struck deeper than any kiss. My throat tightened with something dangerously, close to tears, because the truth was I had chosen, long before I dared to admit it. My fingers brushed his jaw, rough with the shadow of stubble. "You're infuriating, arrogant, impossible." His lips curved in a half smile. And yet, I whispered, leaning in until my lips hovered over his. I can't stop wanting you. That broke us both. The kiss that followed was desperate, unrestrained, as though every second apart had been a mistake we were finally correcting. His hand slid over me with a hunger barely leashed, and mine clung to him with equal urgency, every line of his body pressed into mine, every heartbeat sinking until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. It wasn't just passion. It was surrender. It was the breaking point we'd been circling from the very beginning, when we finally pulled apart, gasping, his hand still cradling my face as if I might vanish. He whispered the words I didn't expect. You terrify me. My eyes widened. Me? He nodded, his thumb brushing over my cheek. You make me want things I promised myself I'd never want again. The vulnerability in his voice shook me more than the intensity of his kiss. It wasn't the confession of a powerful CEO. It was the truth of a man who had built walls so high, no one had scaled them, until me. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just desire. It was something bigger, something dangerous, something neither of us could walk away from. Because once a wall breaks and it never stands the same again. The penthouse was quiet that night, the storm outside finally spent. Rain had left the city streets shimmering, and the soft glow of the skyline seeped through the windows, casting everything in gold. It should have felt ordinary. But nothing about us had been ordinary. Not the way he looked at me, not the way my chest still raced when he entered the room. He found me in the living room, curled on the sofa with a blanket around my shoulders. I hadn't moved since he left that morning. I'd tried half-heartedly to convince myself the moment of yesterday had been enough, that restraint and patience could still hold sway. But when he stepped into the light, I realized they couldn't. Do you know what time it is? He asked softly, closing the distance between us. I shook my head. Doesn't matter, he said, voice low, commanding yet tender. Time doesn't exist for us tonight. Only this. And then he sat beside me, close enough that our knees brushed, close enough that the warmth of him seeped into my frozen fingers. For a heartbeat, we just existed together, suspended in quiet intimacy. His eyes searched mine, and I knew he saw every fear, every hesitation, every secret longing I'd buried, so deep I'd almost forgotten it. I whispered, though the words failed me. You can, he interrupted, voice steady, unwavering. Because I won't let you fight this alone. The confession hit me harder than any kiss ever could. His hands were warm on mine, fingers entwining, holding me not out of possession but partnership, and something inside me finally surrendered. I've been scared, I admitted, voice trembling, scared of losing myself, scared of what I might feel, what I might become if I let this us take over. You won't lose yourself, he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I'll be right here, not to claim you, but to stand beside you. Every step, every heartbeat, every mistake. The tenderness in his voice, the absolute certainty in his eyes, made me want to crumble into him, to finally give in to the storm we'd been holding back. And I did. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder, feeling the solid, unyielding strength of him beneath me. He tilted his head, pressing a kiss to the top of my hair, slow, reverent, like he was sealing every promise we'd silently made. I never thought marriage could feel like this, I whispered. Not fear, not obligation, but like coming home. He chuckled softly, the sound deep, resonant, and impossibly intimate. That's exactly what it is, and I've been waiting for you to see it too. For a long time, we just sat there. No words, no movement, only the rise and fall of our breaths, the warmth of our bodies pressed together, the quiet understanding that the walls between us had finally crumbled. Then he shifted, turning me gently to face him. His eyes held mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "I want to know everything about you," he said, voice low, deliberate. "Not just the smiles and the laughter, but the scars, the doubts, the moments you think no one could understand. Will you let me?" I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. I think I've been waiting my whole life for someone to ask that. And in that moment I understood. The millionaire, the CEO, the man who had seemed untouchable, had only been waiting for me. Just as I'd been waiting for him in ways I hadn't dared to admit. He leaned in, slow, deliberate, and pressed his lips to mine again, not in the reckless hunger of our first kiss, but in a deliberate, consuming devotion. I melted into him, hands tracing the familiar lines of his face, memorizing him as if I'd never let go. We stayed like that for hours, talking in whispers, confessing fears, dreams, secrets we'd never shared. Every laugh, every tear, every stolen glance wove a tapestry that felt more real, more ours, than anything either of us had ever known. And when morning came, sunlight spilling through the windows, we were still there, wrapped in each other, hearts pounding, souls aligned. I realized then that the refusal, the hesitation, the tension, it hadn't pushed him away. It had drawn him closer. Because some things, some connections, aren't built on haste or convenience. They're built on patience, on understanding, on the courage to finally let go. I traced the line of his jaw with my fingers. "So, this is us?" He smiled, that calm, commanding, utterly captivating smile I had fallen for without knowing. This is exactly us, no compromises, no pretenses, just us. And for the first time I believed it, because I had refused him once and he had waited. And in the waiting, he had become mine, in a way no title, no wealth, no contract ever could have forced. That night I finally understood, love like this wasn't about urgency. It was about surrender. And when you surrender to someone who truly sees you, it's not losing yourself.